Great. Okay. Yeah, thanks everybody. I really appreciate you giving up your sort of lunch times to be here. My name's Rob Buckley. I work for Cornwall Council. I'm a sourcing manager on the council's commercial team. And I've got a background. I used to work for Inclusion Cornwall, going way back before I moved across into the council. So I've got a bit of a background around voluntary sector organisations as well. So it's good to see so many of you here today. And the reason that I wanted to have a discussion with you really is because as a council, we obviously highly value working together with the voluntary sector to deliver services and outcomes for people in Cornwall. And it's important that we work together and that we engage. So I'm really sort of interested in your input around our new contract procedure rules. So I'm going to be talking just a bit of quick background on the Procurement Act itself. And then I'll be talking about how that Act has been translated into our council contract procedure rules, which are our own internal rules around procurement. So this is an opportunity for discussion today around what those changes are to raise awareness of how we'll be approaching markets going forwards under our new rules, transparency around that so that people across different sectors are aware of how we'll be doing that. And also, you know, it's a discussion. So I do have rather a lot of slides that I'll be going through. Feel free just to put your hand up and ask questions at any time, because it would be good if we can turn it into a bit more a discussion rather than me just talking through slides. And of course, there'll be time for questions at the end. So has anybody got any questions before I start, or should I go straight on? Okay. No questions. So I'll just launch straight into it. So essentially, the purpose of the new Procurement Act is really the Procurement Act came about following Brexit, and legislation has been redesigned essentially to simplify the way that we procure and source services and goods. And it's a pivotal piece of legislation. Doesn't happen very often. So the last set of legislation came through in 2015, and that's the Public Contract Regulations 2015. So the new Procurement Act will replace those regulations, and it will replace a number of other procurement-related legislation as well. And what that does is that the Procurement Act is the legislation that we operate under. And then underneath that, the council has our own set of contract procedure rules where essentially employees of the council operate under those rules, which are aligned with the Procurement Act. So it's an important piece of legislation. It will change the way that we are procuring from the way that we do at the moment. So if you do bid for our contracts, the Procurement Act has, for those of you might have seen me do a presentation on the Procurement Act even up to a couple of years ago, because we've been waiting for quite some time for it to get to this point. And actually, you may be aware that it's just been delayed again until the end of February. Was due to go live in October. But essentially, the Act is looking at bringing in a much more simpler and flexible system for the way that contracting authorities approach procurement, and Cornwall Council is a contracting authority. It aims to be much more accessible for SMEs, and it also aims to be much more transparent through the procurement cycle in terms of public contracts that are awarded. So although it says go live there in October, there is going to be this delay until the end of February following the election, and there's going to be a sort of a sense check and pause around the procurement policy statement that sits above the Act and the aims of that. So that's out for engagement at the moment. And this slide really sort of shows how the Procurement Act flows down through into our contract procedure rules at the council, and then how those contract procedure rules govern the procurement activity. So it's the way that the council approaches procurement and runs those procurements. And I'm sure that many of you have been involved in tendering for our contracts. Is not perfect. There are many things that we could do to improve and make those processes much more accessible, more transparent, and more engaging. So you can see how the contract procedure rules sit in between the Act and our procurement activity. And so what we've done is we've obviously reviewed the Act and developed a new set of contract procedure rules. And at the heart of that, we've had these kind of 4 integral questions that we've been asking all the way through. So how can we make it easier to do business with the council? How can we ensure that our contracts are supporting the local economy? How are we going to treat our local suppliers? And how are we going to drive social value through our procurement activity? So those are the 4 main themes that we've always had as a basis as we've been looking at improving this. And this is just for information. So we've had an overarching steering group at the council looking at implementing the Act, and then 4 subgroups underneath that: policies and procedures, contract management, communications and training, and systems. So the group with the contract procedure rules was the policies and procedures. So that really governs our approach to procuring and contract management under the new rules. We want to be on the front foot with our contract procedure rules. We want to be completely transparent with our contracts. There are a much more enhanced set of transparency obligations under the new Procurement Act, which essentially involves publishing notices at every stage of the procurement cycle, right through into the contract management stage of the cycle, and being transparent around contractual changes in contract management. We also need to be planning our procurements earlier and more effectively. So we need to be transparent around our procurement pipelines with the contracts that are coming through. We're already publishing our procurement pipeline. So if you're not already aware of that, those pipelines are on our council website at the moment, and you can look at those procurement pipelines. You can see which contracts are expiring. Excuse me. You can then look at those and decide whether you may wish to prepare for bidding for those contracts and so on. So we already try to do that, but we're always looking at ways that we can improve and enhance that as well. And from your perspective as providers of our services, our contractual services, there are more provisions under the Act to enable you to challenge procurement decisions as well. So from our perspective, we absolutely need to be compliant with the Act. But if we're not compliant with the Act for some reason, then it will be much easier for you to hold us to account and to challenge us around that. At the moment, challenging a procurement process can be a major thing to do. So this is all aimed at ensuring that the contracting authorities across the country are compliant and transparent. So in terms of our key aims in the redesign, so we're really looking for a simplified and digitised set of contract procedure rules. So from the council perspective at the moment, our contract procedure rules document is a lengthy PDF document. We have a number of procedure notes that sit underneath the rules as well, and we have a large amount of guidance that kind of sits under that. And currently at the moment, when we reviewed it, essentially we thought this could be done in a better way. It could be split out so you've got a much simpler document that's a single set of rules that we need to stick to, and then you've got the guidance and the how-to that is presented sort of differently. So we're really aiming for this to be much more transparent for our staff, we're buying services across the whole council. Every directorate is commissioning and buying services. So we're all operating under these same rules. So our aim is to ensure that we've got a consistent approach, and our rules are much more simplified and engaging. Enhanced transparency for threshold governance and assurance. So that's internally as a council, how we deal with our sort of business cases that go through for consideration around, like the make, do or buy decision. If we go out to market to procure, sort of how do we approach that? What are the commercial models going to be, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as I say, we want a single set of rules focusing on what to do, and a set of guidance focusing on the how to do it. So that's, for your information, really what some of the issues that we've been trying to address. And this slide sort of really shows how important the contract procedure rules are. I know sort of contract procedure rules sounds a bit boring, but actually it's really important. They're a really important part of how we operate. So all of our third-party spend flows through those contract procedure rules. And if we don't get those rules right in terms of how we can work with markets, pre-procurement, how we engage, for example, and how we co-design our specifications and our service requirements, our process, in the procurement itself, is it accessible, is it proportionate, etc. So if we don't get that right within the rules, then that doesn't lead to as good outcomes in terms of the right hand side of that illustration around value for money for people in Cornwall, the quality of services, the social value that's generated from the contracts, the saving of taxpayer monies, additional value, and good contract management. So essentially, this is the opportunity to try and improve all of those outcomes through a new approach to the rules. And from the council perspective, we have to balance our compliance side of things with accessibility as well. So whilst we're trying to make things much more streamlined and accessible, at the same time, we also have to make sure that as a contracting authority that we are compliant with our legal obligations under the Act. So that's the balance that we've been making sure that we achieve. So there are a number of key changes that we've made to the contract procedure rules. And as I said, the rules have gone through full council, and our new rules will come into effect in alignment with the Procurement Act. So when the Procurement Act goes live, that's when these rules will start taking effect. So the first one is sort of a significant one to be aware of. And this is that under the Procurement Act, we now have the ability to reserve procurements below the regulated threshold. So the regulated threshold for revenue services contracts is just shy of 215,000, and the regulated threshold for capital contracts is 5.3 million. So we now have the ability to reserve those procurement processes for local suppliers, essentially. So we're working on our definition of local. At the moment, our definition is a bit of a sort of blunt instrument. It's based on where it's based on the address on the invoice, essentially. Which is fine to an extent, but then you do have other organisations that may not have a head office, for example, within Cornwall, but they may still have an operational base where they're contributing to the local economy, etc. And at the moment, we're not able to count local suppliers for that purpose, but we're looking at how we can redefine our approach to local suppliers and how we reserve contracts. But essentially, this change is aimed at our Cornwall local-based suppliers. We'll be looking to reserve competitions for those suppliers only. And the hope there is that will lead to increased spend through the local supply chain. So you can see how much as a council that we're spending every year. So it's a significant amount of money, and we're hoping that more of that will go into the local economy. We're hoping that it may stimulate other suppliers to also set up and operate in Cornwall as well, and lead to increased social value through our contracts as well. At the same time, sort of linked to that, the second recommendation is around increasing our threshold for 3 quotes, essentially. So what we're looking to do is up to, for revenue-based services, up to that £215,000 figure. We're moving away from the requirement to run a full procurement process, and we're moving to a minimum requirement of 3 quotes. So what that means, for up to that figure, we'll be able to go out locally, and we'll be able to request 3 quotes as opposed to a full procurement process. So hopefully that is a much more proportionate approach that will impact on some of your organisations if you're bidding for those types of contracts. We're moving to sort of self-serve for those level of contracts as well. So that essentially that means that it will be a much simpler approach, and our colleagues across the council won't have the support of our procurement team for that directly, although of course there will be support and web-based support for them. We are looking at our approach to social value as well, and trying to ensure that we're capturing the social value that is being delivered, because we haven't been the best at capturing all of the social value that organisations such as yourselves are actually delivering. We want to capture that in our contracts and shout about it. So that is being reviewed around our approach to social value. And also we're streamlining our internal governance approach around our thresholds. So we're reducing the number of internal thresholds that we are operating under in terms of business case governance. And we are looking to strengthen that business case approach as well. And that really goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning in terms of ensuring that we are planning our procurements with sufficient time to engage with the market before we get locked into the procurement process. So there's sufficient time for co-design, sufficient time for input around things like social value, around things like the commercial model. So it is really important that that's co-designed rather than simply sort of designed internally by the council. And strengthening our approach to business cases will help to facilitate that type of behaviour. So in terms of some of the benefits that we're hoping for, so we want to channel our lower value, lower risk procurements through a much lighter touch process, increased and earlier engagement with that commercial process that frees up time for resource to focus on kind of higher value and higher risk contracts. And I think that applies for kind of the council as a buyer and for organisations like yourselves as a provider of services. A proportionate approach in terms of governance, but also a proportionate approach in terms of procurement. And then the other 2 points are kind of more internal for the council, really. Oh, sorry, the next one is more internal for the council, but the last one is that real focus on commercial preference for supporting local suppliers. The Act also has a number of requirements around supporting SMEs and reducing barriers for SMEs to take part in our procurement processes. So this is more in terms of what we call conditions of participation. So at the moment, under the public contract regulations, we have what's called supplier qualification. That's been sort of renamed under the new Act in terms of conditions of participation. And for every procurement, we need to ensure that we are not putting in sort of undue or proportionate sort of barriers to organisations taking part of those in those procurement processes, and the approach to those conditions of participation, things like your insurances and financial sustainability, that sort of thing. There's a real onus on ensuring that is reasonable and proportionate. So the aims of some of those changes is really to ensure that our contracts are much more open for opportunity for SMEs, that there's a much simpler and more transparent system that reduces cost for SMEs to engage in procurement processes, that there's reduced barriers of participation, and ultimately that the SMEs have a greater share of Cornwall Council expenditure, and we're looking at ways to measure that so that in a year's time from the Act we will know if that's happened. But ultimately, it's, as it says there, around increasing transparency, fair competition, and ensuring that all bidders, regardless of their size and resources, have an equal opportunity to participate. And of course, that will then have additional benefits such as SME job creation, tax revenue, and prosperity in the local community. This is a social value linked change as well. So at the moment, sort of legally, I mean, for those of you that are familiar, social value, the sort of additional benefits that can be generated through delivery of a contract, so social, economical, and environmental benefits. And we've implemented the national TOMS measures, which stands for themes, outcomes, and measures, and we use those indicators. So the ones that you can see there on the screen, NT stands for national TOMS, so 1C, etc. And these are indicators that we have got but haven't sort of legally been able to use to their full effect at the moment, but that will change under the new Act, and that will again benefit our local suppliers. So these are all of the indicators that we would sort of count and measure to be aware of, but up until now we haven't been able to count them as weighted scoring criteria, which is important because we do allocate 15% of our procurement evaluation to social value. So if you are able to contribute significantly to these national TOMs, for example, then that will mean that you will score more highly in the procurement process. So we're opening up under the new Act, we're opening up our approach to these TOMs. And in terms of benefits, so significantly increased social value contributions. It will lead to probably increased competition around social value and maximising that amount of social value with benefits for the wider economy. The next one I won't sort of go into so much detail on. This is around our internal approach to our Green Book business cases. I think I've talked about it already, just around how we approach those business cases, how we plan for them, how we develop them in conjunction with our provider colleagues, and how we're developing really robust models that will actually stand up going forwards for the duration of a contract. And finally, this is a bit more internal as well, but just for your awareness, our new rules are going to be a much more simpler web-based approach with, as I say, one set of rules focusing on what to do and one set of guidance. There's going to be a procurement journey that's developed where you'll start your procurement journey. We're working on this at the moment, and it's going to be based on the London Underground Circle line. So for the kind of value thresholds within our rules, our commissioning staff will be directed down a particular procurement journey based on the value of the contract and the risks associated with the contract. And that journey will be kind of a station by station approach. So at each stage of the journey, colleagues within the council that need the information will get the rules that they need to stick to, the guidance they need around how to do that. So that's something that's under development at the moment, and we'll look to make that transparent and publish that as well, along with our rules, so that everybody can see how the council is following its procurement process through in a transparent way. And yeah, so apologies for all of those slides, but that has brought me to the end. Hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview and an understanding of what we as a council are doing of the new Act. And I'm interested in your thoughts and if you've got any questions. So thank you.